This is Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts, with your host, Steve Gold.
Welcome to the podcast that interviews active and retired police officers about their most intense, bizarre, and sometimes humorous moments on the job. It is I, Old Gingerface, coming at you. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for joining. Thank you for all the recent binge listening and reviewing. I truly appreciate that. Thank you to the Patreon members that keep the boat afloat and keep the money coming in to pay for all the expenses of the show. I truly appreciate it. Like the intro said, you were going to hear on this podcast totally unedited, unadulterated stories as the cops live them, the men and women of law enforcement. And that's kind of the whole point. You'll hear these stories and get a better appreciation for what these men and women actually do. And it's my honor to bring them to you. And I'm so happy with how the podcast has grown and you guys are really enjoying it. So thank you for that. Today's guest is a great one. I'm really excited to have him on. He did 21 years, LA County Sheriff's Department. He was a homicide detective. He's also the author of 9 novels and an law enforcement memoir. I'm talking about none other than the great Danny Smith. Danny!
Hi, Steve. Thank you very much.
Hey, man. Great to have you, brother. Like I said, it's an honor to have you, and I'm so glad you're here. And I love that you wrote 9 novels. That's insane.
So far.
Yeah, so far.
I've got 2 more that are at varying stages of being finished. But yeah, I don't have any intention of stopping anytime soon. I'm having a blast with it, and people kind of demand that you keep going when they like what you write.
Yeah, you can't disappoint the folks. I was going through the books, and you have you're wildly successful. You have a ton of 5-star reviews all over the place. Did you ever imagine when you were a copper, you're in the thick of it, you're a homicide detective, that this would be your second career?
I didn't, and people ask me that, and I say, I wished I had, because I would have kept a daily journal. And I mean, you remember the biggest stories and some of the funniest stories, but as you well know, Steve, sometimes it's the minutia that just is so rich, and there's things that yeah, I know if I had kept a journal every day, I'm sure that I just have so much more material, to write about, because I base all my novels, I base the novels, the plots, I kind of make some up and use some of the stuff that I experienced. The characters, same thing. Some of the characters I base on people I've worked with, because quite frankly, you can't make up more interesting characters than the people that we work around, right? And the same with the stories. You can't make up stories that are more entertaining than the stuff that we see out there as cops on the line. So a lot of it's based on reality, and it makes it kind of fun to be able to take the magic pen and do what I want with the story. So I enjoy it.
Absolutely. There are so many different characters that are police officers, aren't there? I mean, I've met so many different archetypes of cops through my career, but there's the super serious guy that climbs the ranks, and he just takes the job super serious, which is good. It's a serious job, and at times you're thankful for that type of attitude.
Yeah.
But then there's the guy that doesn't take the job seriously and is just kind of there. Like, you even wonder why is he still doing it? Or it's like he doesn't care. And then there's a combo where there's the guy that's like that. He's highly likable, doesn't take it serious, but also is a very good cop when he needs to be. And you're like,
right.
Wow, this guy, I wish this guy was my sergeant. Like, this is a guy I want to be in charge of my shift. You know what I mean? But and everywhere in between, there's so many different types of funny characters doing this job.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a rich environment.
Absolutely. Target rich environment for writing.
Target rich.
Heck yeah. So were you with LASD the whole career?
Yes.
Okay. So you went through their academy, hit the roads running with them, went through their field training and everything.
Yeah. Actually, with the Sheriff's Department, we have a short stint in custody when we first graduate from the academy, because that's one of the sheriff's main responsibilities, and most young deputies don't want to work the jail, so they force us to.
Yeah.
You have to do your time there. But So I worked it's called Men's Central Jail. Everyone on the street just calls it county, and it's actually bigger than I think it houses more inmates than any prison in the country. We were housing 10,000 inmates when I was there. It was
Oh my
insane.
gosh.
But you learn a lot. It's kind of cool because by the time you hit the streets, I mean, I grew up, I was just a dumb white boy from frickin' Newhall, California, this little town that, I didn't
Newhall,
have a
yeah, I
lot of
know it.
life. Yeah, I didn't have a lot of life experience, but you take a guy like that and where I went to work patrol in South LA, if you go straight from the academy to there, you're going to be 100% relying on your training officer to keep you alive and to educate you. But you work in the jail for 2 years, and when you're working, and you always do overtime, so you're working 60, 70 hours a week, you're basically living with convicts. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you what, that's an education, man. I mean, by the time you hit the street, cons, convicts, gangs, and then now you're on the streets and you're running into the same people that you were dealing with in the jail, and sometimes you know them, intimately, and they know you, and it's an interesting thing. I think in some ways, even though none of us like working the custody, or most of us didn't, I think it has a value to it that you're in a controlled environment, right? It's not a place that you're likely to be killed because you're in a controlled environment, but you get a good education and you're streetwise by the time you hit the streets.
Yeah, absolutely. You learn the culture, learn how they talk, you interact with them. I've heard that from other deputies that have come on before, and like you said, it's not like what you want to do initially, but it's almost you're probably thankful for it down the road when you're on the road and you have some kind of bearing to the people you're dealing with, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's like a thing at when I was at LAPD backgrounds. I did a couple years there, and the sheriff, the LASD, our candidates were always going for both. And then I think the sheriff's department started making the stint you had to do in the jail smaller and smaller to entice people to come over, because they know they came up through the system. They know that a lot of people don't sign up to be a jailer. They sign up to be a cop. They want to hit the road. So the idea of
Yeah,
doing that was always the big wedge we could throw in there. Like, you want to go to a jail? Come on, we'll put you right on the road. Let's do this thing.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
They smarten up to that one for sure. But yeah, you need. There are also I've run into a lot of people that like the jails. I don't think they would, and then before you know it, they're like a lieutenant in the jail, and they never go on patrol. They like the controlled atmosphere.
Yeah, there are people that don't want to work the streets, and I mean, quite frankly, there's I'm sure there's cops that are afraid to go to the streets, but they get comfortable in the jail. Sometimes they get comfortable just because the unlimited overtime. And we used to joke that every 5 or 6, 7 years, the county would have this major budget crisis, and next thing you know, there'd be a huge sale at the jail. Everyone's selling boats and RVs and all the
Yeah,
shit they buy with all their overtime when all of a sudden the overtime gets cut. But yeah, it wasn't for me, man. I was all about hitting the streets, and that's what I did. I went to South Central Los Angeles, a place called Firestone that no longer exists, but it was the legendary station of our department for many years. I mean, it's always going to be a legend.
I heard about it
And
when I was at LAPD.
yeah, and that's where I wanted to work, and that's where I went and trained, and I spent a decade down there, and I mean, it was cool. I loved it.
That's great, man. So when you were there, when you were a young Deputy Smith, can you recall your first hot call you went to, or first call that really got your adrenaline going?
It's funny, Steve. I can't, and I listen to your podcast, and I hear the different guys telling their stories, and I thought, this is going to sound, I don't know. I mean, it just some people might not believe it, but you know, uh, down there, I mean, my first shift right out of the gate, you're all of a sudden you're coming out of the driveway, and it's spinning your tires and rolling code three, and you're lost. You're a trainee and your TO's, behind the wheel, but it seemed like we were always just racing from one call to another. So I don't actually remember the first call that we rolled hard on, but the one that I do remember, it wasn't the first, But the one call that I clearly remember that really stuck in my mind, it was actually the second murder I handled. And um, we were actually walking up to the steps on some kind of a family disturbance call, and the call goes out over the radio. Back then we didn't have handhelds, so you turn the radio onto a PA, and it broadcasts, basically for the whole neighborhood. And
Yeah.
we're walking up the steps, and we hear this call come out of a 245 now, stabbing victim. And 245 is assault with a deadly weapon, as you know, but for your audience, I'm going to clarify that. And my training officer goes, go, let's go. And we turn around, we run back to the car, and I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm thinking, aren't we, I mean, there's a problem here. Where aren't we supposed to handle that?
Yeah.
Of
What
course,
about these people?
I'm not taking any, independent action. I'm doing what he tells me to do. But we jump in the car, and we take off. And I mean, he takes off like a bat out of hell and grabs the radio and says, "Hey, this is 13. We're rolling code 3, and we'll take the handle on this." And I just remember there was this different intensity and excitement that he had. And the next thing I know, he looks over at me and he smiles. He goes, "You ready for your second murder?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, yeah." So later on, I asked him, and uh, as a street cop, you know that once you handle a murder, that's like you got the big one out of the way. And where we worked, by the time you're done with your 6 month of training, you've handled four, five, six, eight of them. So I was like, yeah, fine. I got, my first murder. I already have it over my belt, and I'm ready for my next one. But I didn't understand why he told me that. And what was interesting was we rolled to the call. We're working PM shift, 2 to 10 p.m. And this happened probably at about 2:30 in the afternoon. I mean, we were right out of the gate. And and it was a lady who worked at a clinic, a medical clinic, and she was dressed in kind of a white nurse's outfit, and her estranged boyfriend sliced her up in front of this clinic on Florence Avenue, 1400 block of Florence Avenue at 2:30 in the afternoon, with
Jeez.
100 people watching. And in the later days, when they're talking about the autopsy of Nicole Brown Simpson, and they're describing her wounds and everything, I'm like, yeah, I've seen that, because Virginia Gonzalez on Florence Avenue, she literally had her throat slit to where, I mean, she was almost decapitated,
Jeez.
and then stabbed probably 40 or 50 times, and this white uniform was completely red. So that's the call that I'll never forget, as being one of my first really intense, roll hard. And so I asked my training officer later, I said, how'd you know it was going to be a murder? He says, oh, people get shot around here all the time, they survive. He goes, but man, those stabbing calls, he says, those are the ones that these the people usually die. And that
Yeah, those are
surprised me. But
personal.
I found that, he was right. It seemed like a lot of the stabbings, they definitely, went DOA, and a lot of the shooting, Martin Luther King Hospital would save them,
Yeah, that's funny you say that. Well, it's not funny, obviously, but I mean, a lot of the ones when I hear about people's throats slit, a lot of people say their heads are almost taken off. So it's obviously it's like a crime of passion type of thing. Like they're really sawing at it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's rage, and so that was definitely an eye opener, and an interesting case. I'll tell you something that else was interesting about that is the next day when I came into the station, my training officer meets me at the back door, which is right by the booking cage. And he says, "Hey, come take a look at this man over here." And I walk over, and here's this, Mexican national that doesn't speak English, and he, looks kind of we used to call them the Sinaloan cowboys. They dress very Western. And Mike says, my training officer's name was Mike. He says, take a long, hard look at that guy. And I said, okay, yeah. I mean, he looked just like half the drunks that were in the booking cage at any given time.
Right.
And he said, he goes, that's the man that cut up Virginia Gonzalez on Florence Avenue last night or yesterday afternoon. And I'm like, oh wow. And the guy's sitting there nodding and smiling, and his gold teeth are showing. And I don't know how much of the conversation he picks up, but my training officer says, he goes, you take a good long look at him and don't ever forget it, because he goes, they are very dangerous people. The gangsters, we know who they are. They stand out. They show themselves to you. You already know you're going to approach a gangster on a corner. There's a good potential of having conflict or that he has a weapon. But this guy looked just like a regular guy, and yet what a vicious killer he was. And that was
Yeah.
that was my training officer's point on that. He said you need to really take a look at him and realize that the most vicious killer doesn't have to look impressive. This guy can just be a regular looking guy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's scary. And when you first started, were like the cholos a thing? Was that like a
Was
archetype?
what?
The cholos, was that like
Oh,
a
oh yeah,
gangster? Yeah.
yeah,
Cause
oh yeah.
I don't know a lot about that, but when I was at Backgrounds, working, one guy I worked with had a story about cholos actually saving him and his buddy from, like, you can correct me, gangsters. So it sounded like the old school guys back when he was a kid were the cholos. They had, like, like the wingtip shoes, and they buttoned their shirts all the way up, and they were kind of like in charge. They were kind of like the old. At this point, they were, maybe it was the '70s, or they were like kind of like old school gangsters. And some of the kids were roughing him up, him and his buddy up, when they were trying to get home from school. And these guys kind of stepped in, came to the school one day, and put these younger kids up against the wall by the throat, and kind of gave them a little correction. And I just don't know how those all relate to each other. Cholos versus, like, kids that are gangsters. Like, were the cholos like the bosses?
No, no, cholo is kind of a generic term for the Mexican American um, who takes on that particular
Persona.
persona. And the gangsters. I think what you're talking about is, and you said it, OG. The original gangsters, the older guys that they really look the part, and they have the pressed khaki pants, and the whole nine yards. And a lot of times the younger gangsters don't quite take that on. Sometimes they do after they've been to prison, because prison's where a lot of that posturing comes from, and the dress code and everything else. So, um, but yeah, I mean, there's cholos who aren't gang members. I'll say that. There's a lot of people that you can see lowrider clubs, and they're definitely cholos. They're in these clubs, but they don't claim a neighborhood, and they're not gangsters per se. So there is some difference, but there's overlap too, I guess, is what I'm trying to tell you.
Okay, sorry for being so uninformed, Danny. I just don't know. But he told me
Yeah,
this. There was a cool story. I'm like, oh, it sounds like like you said,
yeah.
these OG gangsters came up and were like, no, leave these kids alone or whatever. But maybe they were just like guys, established guys in the neighborhood that everybody respected. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
So Cholo's kind of like is that like the same thing as calling somebody a Mick or a Wop or something? Or do they wear Cholo proudly? Is that like a
I don't, yeah, I would say probably yes to both of those questions. I think it's similar to the Mick or whatever, but yeah, I don't think that most of them consider cholo being a derogatory term, but I mean, I don't know for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure you I'm sure you weren't pals with them or anything. You didn't have long conversations with
No,
them.
and I'm not a gang expert. I mean, I worked around gangs, my whole career, but that wasn't my forte. I'm not a gang expert, and so I wouldn't want to try to be the school teacher on that.
No, I got you. I totally understand. Danny, can you describe the strangest or most bizarre thing you dealt with in your career?
So this is an interesting story, and it was after I had made detectives. I was working at a place called Special Investigations Metro Detail, and what we handled there was basically in progress cases, and it was a county-wide uh, organization. So we worked the entire county. We were centralized. And the county is 5,000 square miles, right? So the sheriff's department's a big department, 10,000 sworn. And
Huge.
you had back then, I think 26, 27 substations all around the county. And each of those stations, they have their own detectives, but then there's a detective division that oversees, the entire county, and they're specialized. And that includes homicide, which I went to after being at Metro for a year. But when I was at Metro, the cases we handled were all in progress cases. You handled murder for hire, kidnap for ransom, escape from custody, threats against public officials, and life-threatening extortion. And we also had the collateral duty of fugitive duty, because during a budget crisis a few years prior, they did away with fugitive team. So that basically, when we didn't have an in progress case going, what we were doing was doing fugitive work, going out and grabbing people and traveling all over the country and picking people up and extraditing them and bringing them back, and it was kind of fun. Well, I lived up in the North County, and the office was down in Whittier, and so it was really geographically inconvenient for me. So one of the fun things about fugitive is we had file cabinets full of warrants, just file cabinets full of them, right? And I would always go through the file cabinets and always have a couple dozen active warrants, all felony warrants, where I when I didn't have something going on at the office that I could go work these cases, and I'd usually try to do it on the way home so I could get out of there, beat traffic, and go hit North County areas and look for fugitives. So one day I get one, and I'm like, this is up in Gorman, and Gorman is up, at the in the very north part of our county. It's so far away that they actually have or they did back then, they had a resident deputy that lived there, and it's a remote area. It's probably at 3,500 feet. It gets snow every year.
So this is north
It's
of San La
crazy.
Clarita, like way up there.
Yeah, yeah, up by the Grapevine.
Oh
So,
wow.
um, so I'm thinking, okay, that's cool. I'll go check this out on the way home and see if I can, hook this guy up. And it's not the smartest thing in the world, but I'm going to do it anyway because that's how I was kind of wired. So I drive up there. My cop car, it's a take-home car, but it's a 5.0 Mustang, and it looks
Nice.
anything other than a cop car. And it was cool. It was cool to drive. It was fast. It cornered good, but it wasn't really good in the mountains. And I get up there, and pretty soon, man, I mean, I felt like I was driving forever, and I'm like, Jesus, where the hell am I, right? I mean, I knew where I was, but I started to question, my sanity for being up here, because pretty soon I realized that my cell phone, there's no cell phone coverage, the handheld radio doesn't work, and I keep the handheld radio with me though, and after, every time I hit another switchback, I try to see if anyone can copy me, Santa Clarita Station, Gorman Station, whatever, Lancaster Station, thinking, maybe someone could pick me up, but no, I had zero
Great.
communications. And so I'm tooling along and thinking, maybe I'm not even going to find this place. Maybe I've got this all wrong, because there was nothing up there. And then all of a sudden, this big rattlesnake crawls across the road in front of me, and I have to stop, and look at it because it's kind of fascinating. It's huge, and it crawls off, and I drive on by and thinking, this is really strange, this is just kind of creepy.
Yeah.
So I finally top out at the top of this hill, and the pine trees are cleared, and there's a house, a two-story log cabin that's tucked into this place, and and I go creeping up toward this house, and thinking, man, this is crazy.
All
I
by
mean,
your
I don't know if
lonesome.
this guy, yeah, and as I'm pulling up toward the porch, I look up, and in the second story window, there's two kids staring at me, and they're both like towheads, just complete white hair. They look identical. They look like twins. They are probably 5 years old, and all I can see is the chest up, but neither of them are wearing shirts, and they're just staring at me. And I mean, it's like it was weird, man. It was like,
Children of the
this
corn.
is so strange. Yes. And so I'm still looking at them when all of a sudden these freaking dogs come flying off the porch, and there's got to be a
Oh,
dozen freaking dogs. And
I
I didn't
hate
even
dogs.
notice them because I'm looking at these kids, and they circle my car, and they're just going insane. They're jumping up on the car and now barking their fool heads off. And and I'm dealing with that when all of a sudden the front door flies open, and this woman comes running out, and she runs out the front door, across the porch, all the way to the front steps that lead to the patio area, and she's screaming at her dogs, and she's stark raving naked, just
Whoa.
completely 100% freaking naked. So I'm looking at this thinking, can this get any weirder? And finally she looks at me, and it's like she all of a sudden realizes that someone's there. Like maybe she didn't expect company, didn't know why the dogs were barking or whatever. but she kind of just looks at me for a minute, and I'm looking at her, of course, she's naked. And I mean, she's kind of a good looking gal in a tweaker sort of way, I mean, she definitely doesn't have any
Right.
body fat, but and then she turns and just saunters back into the house. And the dogs had kind of followed her, and they seemed to have mellowed out. And I thought, well, in for a dime, in for a dollar, man. So I get out of the car and I go up there, and the dogs all circle me and stuff, and I knock on the door, and they're sniffing me and everything, but they're not bothering me. And I knock on the door, and I'm waiting, and pretty soon she opens the door. And same gal, she got blonde hair. I didn't notice that the first time. I don't think I was looking at her hair color the first time,
You're right.
but now she's wearing this red Pendleton shirt that was way too big for her. I mean, it was probably too big for Shaquille O'Neal, to be honest with you. This thing's huge, right? And I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I'm thinking that's not her shirt, and whoever wears that shirt is going to be formidable. And
Yeah.
and right as we're starting to have this conversation, I'm like, hey, I'm looking for such and such. I glanced at the warrant, and I hear this booming voice behind her. Can we swear on this show?
Yeah.
Okay. I hear this booming voice behind me. Who the fuck is it? So she kind of throws her voice over her shoulder towards some unknown beast behind her and says, "It's the cops."
Oh, great.
Well, when she said that, I was like, "Awesome! She thinks there's more than one of me."
Yeah. Plural.
And yeah, and I'm thinking that's going to work out perfectly. And so I tell her, I said, "Hey, I just checking to see if such and such lives here." And she goes, "Who?" Well, right as that's happening, this guy appears behind her, and literally, he can't hide behind her. I mean, you could put three of her in front of him, and you'd still see both sides. This guy's huge, and he looks like a hybrid mountain man biker. I mean, he's just his head's up above the door jamb. He's
Great.
got this long, scraggly beard, hair down at his ass, no shirt on because she's got the shirt, but she he he's standing there now behind her, and he's staring at me, but he says to her, "What the fuck does he want?" And she starts to say, "He's looking for, who'd you say you're looking for?" And right about then I decide, okay, it's time to start play acting. So I pick up my handheld radio that's good for nothing other than a paperweight, or I mean, I could throw it at this guy when I tried to run away if I wanted to, but I get on the radio. I say, "Hey guys, hold your position. We're code 4 up here. Just everyone hold their positions.
Yeah.
Because I want him. I'm thinking, you know what? I want to leave here today because I don't know what their plans are for tonight.
Rather
I
not
just
have
don't
my
want to be
arms ripped
part of
off.
it.
Yeah.
I felt like I was hearing banjos in the background. I'm thinking, whatever they got planned for tonight, I don't want to be part of it. I just want to leave here. I don't care what else happens. And I don't care if they got this fugitive right behind this big guy. I don't care. I'm leaving. That's all I want to do is leave, right? Because I'm thinking if this guy charges me and I shoot him, it'd be like shooting a bear. I mean, it just piss
Yeah.
him off. And then he'll take my gun and embarrass me and, beat me with it. So long story short, the description of my guy that I'm looking for is like 5'7", 140. So I said, well, clearly this guy doesn't live here, so thanks. You folks have a nice day. I'll be out of here. Don't want to bother you anymore. And I'm sure they're in there cooking meth and whatever.
Yeah.
So I excuse myself, and I go walking off the freaking porch, and a couple of the dogs are kind of following me, and then they fade away, and I'm glancing back at them. And as I get in the car, I look, and he's still standing there staring at me, and she's nowhere to be seen. And I get in the car, close the door, fire that sucker up. I look upstairs, and those two mannequin-like children are still staring out the window. And I back out of there and start heading back toward the road, and there's this distance to cover, and I'm thinking, God, I hope there's not like freaking a scope sight on my back of my head right now. And as soon as I hit the road itself, I just lit it up, man. I was throwing gravel and spinning out, and I started racing down the road, and then I started laughing, man. I'm like, God, what a trip that was, man. That was crazy. So that was probably the most bizarre thing, one of the most bizarre things that ever happened to me in my career. And of course, everyone got a big kick out of it the next day, laughing at me at the office when I was telling the story. And my lieutenant said, he goes, Danny, he says, man, he goes, if you'd been killed up there, he goes, everyone would just be saying, what the fuck was he thinking? you know? Yeah. So
Oh man. Yeah. Wow. Do you think the little guy was in there, or do you think it was just old address?
no, no, these a lot of those warrants, man, they were dead ends because these guys, that are on the run, they couch surf and it usually took two, three, four, times to find a guy. And this
Yeah.
was my first house that I checked for this particular guy, and I had several addresses for him, but I don't even remember if I ended up finding him or not. But that story was just, worth a mint,
Yeah, man, I hate dealing with dogs. I love dogs, but I don't. I hate dealing with while I'm working. I just feel like I feel like there's an extra aggressiveness with them when you're in. They like they can sense you're a cop, almost like they're extra
Yeah,
bitey. I got bit by
yeah,
one years ago. I got bit by a fox hair terrier, like a little dog, of course.
yeah,
And they're the first thing they always say is like, "Oh, he's not a biter," and it goes right behind me, latches onto my calf. I got blood going down my leg. I'm like, yeah. And then it was at an old lady's house. I was like there to. Her husband died, and he had a bunch of guns, and I was at the beach drinking coffee, and she's like, "Hey, my husband's got guns." Like, yeah, I'll come by. So I come by, and she lets this dog out, and it immediately latches onto me. It's ripping into my leg, and oh man, it just seems like I just almost got bit last week also, where this lady let her dog out and it was snapping at me and I kicked it, and I'm like, I'm sorry I'm kicking your dog, but like, do you know anything about your own dog? Like, I have a dog.
yeah,
I let it out when people come because I know it's not going to bite anybody. You don't.
yeah.
She's like, well, I've had him for years. I'm like, well, what the hell, lady? Dog's trying to bite me. Damn, man, that's a good one. That is freaky. You are lucky, man, because that up. I know what you're talking about going above the pine trees because I did some. While I was in Southern California, I worked for a short stint as a fraud investigator for an insurance company, and they send you to the weirdest places. And I went to a
Yeah.
place like that up near the Sequoia National Forest, where somebody torched a car, and I kept driving and driving and driving and driving, and then the trees went away. They got smaller and smaller and smaller, and before you know it, you're in no man's land. There's no cell service, no one to help you, especially when you're insured. When you're an insurance investigator, like you're lower than whale shit. It's like no one respects
Yeah.
you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're not supposed to have a gun, whether I have one or not. I'm
Right.
not going to speak to, but yeah,
Right.
just a bad feeling. I also had a cholo pop the tires of my insurance car when I was in interviewing him. Had one of his friends in Bakersfield. Yeah, he's mixing a big drink, like a big gulp up with a knife, and then I do the interview. He's no help, and I go out. The tires are flat. He's trying to convince me to pull my car into his garage. They're going to patch me up. Hey, come on, bro. Hey, man, we're going to take care of you. I drove on my rims. I was like, see you later, man. These guys are going to freaking kill
Oh
me.
God.
Damn,
Yeah.
man. Danny, can you tell us about your most intense or terrifying call? I'm sure you have a ton, but does one stick out to you?
God, intense or terrifying. I don't think I could call any of them terrifying because there were a lot of, I mean, hundreds of calls that were intense, but I never felt terrified until after. And I guess the one story that I could tell you about that is that my partner and I working um, patrol one night, and we're on Central Avenue and see a good shake. These two guys coming off a dope street, and they've got the felony look on their face. Their eyes are huge like saucers, and they don't want to see the cops. And so we start following them, trying to pull them over, and they won't pull over. And long story short, they take us over into the city, and at the mouth of an alley, and they're talking and looking back the whole time. I mean, we're putting along at 20, 25 miles an hour, and my partner and I are both like, man, they're gonna bail, they're gonna bail, they're gonna bail. And they get to the mouth of an alley, and it's dark. it's kind of shaded by a big tree, and I think the street light probably had been shot out, but it was just a pitch black spot, perfect for them to bail out. And I saw the alley, and I'm thinking, yeah, he's going to run right up that alley. And I was never fast, so I wanted to get a jump on him, and it was a mistake that I remembered for the rest of my career. And I when I was a training officer, I'd tell other guys about this, that I got the idea that he was going to run, and it's the worst thing you can do to assume that someone's going to do something, that rather than just watching and reacting to what they do. I had it in my head they were going to run. So I bailed out as we're coming to a stop, and I'm out around the door of my car as he's bailing out of his car. And we're probably, 20 feet from each other. And he turns and he's facing me, and I can't see. He's a big guy, and he's wearing this big black trench coat. And all of a sudden I realize he ain't running, man. Holy shit, So I'm drawn down on him, and I'm thinking, I think he's got a gun. I mean, this all happened in a split second,
Sure.
but it doesn't seem that way. The time just like slows down, and you can kind of it's just kind of weird. You can have a million thoughts because time slows down. Like even though it happens in a second, it feels like it took 10 minutes. And all of a sudden I hear this clank. I mean, it's loud, solid metal clank hitting the ground. And I'm in this shoot, don't shoot scenario, and my first instinct was shoot. And then all of a sudden I was like, don't shoot. I mean, he just dropped his gun. And he looked at me, and then he took off running. And it's like, I look back on that moment, and I wish that I would have been able to know for sure he had that gun before he dropped it, because I honestly wish I could have shot him. I mean, some people are going to be appalled at hearing that, but trust me, a guy that's going to take on a cop, I guarantee he's killed before, and he's killed since then too, because he got away that night. But anyway, I took off chasing him, and then he's fumbling in his waistband. I decide he's probably got another gun, and by then I'm pissed off enough that I go ahead and start shooting at him. But I don't hit him. We're in a running little gunfight.
Yeah.
Long story short, go back to the car, because my partner's detaining the driver of the car, and I know that I can't keep chasing this guy, because I don't want to be split up, and I knew that my partner would have probably put out that, hey, we got shots fired, because he heard my gunshots. So I run back to the car, and we get this other guy in custody, and now all of our assisting units are there, and we set up a containment, and we're going to try to catch this other guy. Well, the gun that he dropped, we go over to the ground, and it's a fully automatic uh, Mac 11,
Oh, wow.
380 caliber, with a 32 round clip in it that's good to go. And that gun is an open bolt gun, meaning that the only time that the bolt is closed on that gun is when it drops and lands on an empty chamber, like you're out of bullets. And so it's original configuration. You're going to carry it. It's an open bolt. You pull the trigger, and all you have to do is pull the trigger and hold it, and it can fire that 32 round magazine in like 1.2 seconds or something
Yeah.
insane. So at 20 feet, I mean, I would have been like Swiss cheese, and the bolt was closed. So that was kind of like, interesting. Maybe there's not a round in the chamber. Well, there was a round in the chamber, and the primer had a dent on it. So the gun,
Whoa.
the yeah, so the gun malfunctioned. Basically, he pulled it on me. He pulled the trigger on me, and the gun malfunctioned, and that's when he dropped it. Otherwise, I'd be interviewing some other guy here today, because there's no way I would have survived that. I'd left the cover of my car. I was, within 20 feet of him face on, and he's got this machine pistol, and it would have just lit me up. So that one afterwards is when I was definitely terrified afterwards, um, because I realized how close to death I'd come.
Oh, yeah. You think about that the next morning when you wake up. First thing you think about.
Oh man, I'll tell you what, I went home and drank a lot of beers that night. I mean, a lot of beers that night. Yeah.
Damn.
Reliving that over and over. And it actually, the caper actually haunted me the rest of my career. I mean, just me personally, because I always thought about that, it just pissed me off that I didn't freaking light him up when I had the chance, but I didn't know I had the chance. And the good guy, we're good guys for a reason. So the instant that I realized he had a gun, it was the same instance that I realized that he no longer had that gun. That he had the gun, but he dropped it.
Yeah.
So a good guy doesn't shoot in that scenario, and you don't have time to consider it and think about it. It's just that's who you are. That's why we're the good guys,
Yeah.
right? We're not going to shoot an unarmed man. I mean, it happens, but it's usually not intentional, and it's an accident. And every cop goes through their career just praying they're not in a bad shooting. So you kind of take some chances sometimes that a guy's reaching into his pocket. Well, is he going for a weapon, or is he stupid? He's just not listening to your command to let to raise his hands or whatever. And you don't want to shoot a guy and then he pulls out a cell phone. No one wants that shooting. No one wants to
Yeah.
live with that.
And you
So
come
yeah,
to
that
find out that he earned it, but you didn't know at the time.
yeah,
Damn. That's sketchy. That would haunt me for sure. For sure.
yeah, that was intense. So the and and there were others. I mean, I've written about a lot of it in my memoir. You mentioned I wrote 9 novels, but I also have one nonfiction. It's a memoir called Nothing Left to Prove, and that story and the naked woman on the mountain and several others are in there. But that particular story right there was definitely one of the most intense encounters I ever had that was pretty bad. And I mean, there's others. I got beaten unconscious one night, and there's all kinds of shit. I had a pretty hairy career. I was 21 years in the fast lane.
Yeah, I bet. Do you have any homicide investigations that stood out for you? For any big ones that were kind of like earmarks in your career?
Oh yeah, quite more than a few actually. Um, but uh, one tragic case, a 4-year-old girl thrown off a cliff by her biological father.
Whoa.
That case about killed me, and um, that was a tough one. He had a couple of no body cases, and those were really interesting, and we were able to me and my partner were able to solve both of them, put a woman on death row. Probably the most um, fascinating in a true crime commercial interest type of a way would be a case that I had where a tragic Native American up in Lancaster was kidnapped, robbed, tortured, and burned alive by skinheads,
Whoa.
and and it was one of the skinheads' mother who put them up to it, and she was his girlfriend, the victim's girlfriend. So that was a really crazy case, and we got her on the death penalty, although California never kill her, but that yeah, there's four of them, and two were doing life without parole. One the woman got the death penalty, and then a 14-year-old that was there, he rolled over on everyone and testified against the others, so he did minimal time, but um, that was quite a um, horrendous case to say the least.
Yeah. Wow. I remember when I got trained as a insurance investigator, the guy I rode with was from ethnically he was from El Salvador, and we would have cases that would go into the high desert. So, you know, Victorville and Phelan area or and beyond. And he always said that this will be your area because this is where the white supremacists are.
Oh
So he always said that to
yeah.
me. This is where the skinheads are. But I never, we were doing tit for tat insurance investigations out there. It was, staged accidents or staged stolen car or someone needs money so they torch their car or whatever. I never actually ran into the skinhead element out there, but not just him, other people had told me that, yeah, that's where the skinheads are. So I guess, I mean, hearing that from you, that tells me that that is true. The skinheads are alive and well in the high desert. Is that the way it is?
Oh yeah. Well, the Antelope Valley, the Palmdale and Lancaster are the two stations that we have up there. And when I worked homicide, boy, we got a lot of cases up there, and a lot of the cases were just really uh, bizarre. But yeah, over the years, what had happened was, you go back to the 70s, and the aerospace industry is what kind of brought Antelope Valley to life. And then in the 80s and 90s, there was kind of something happened to the economy and the market, and all these tract homes that were being built were kind of left in various stages of construction. And at the same time, our wonderful state started paroling people there because they felt it would be better than to have them down in Compton or wherever they were from. And pretty soon all the gangs were moving up there. And so if you talk to some of the guys that started some of these gangs, and I have, um, they will tell you, the white boys that started these, skinhead gangs, they will tell you that they were kind of compelled to gang up together because once everyone from South LA started moving up there, they were getting robbed blind, just robbed and beaten, and there's nothing they could do. And they realized that the only chance they had is if they basically behaved like the gangs that were moving into their areas. And I mean, I think that's an excuse for some. I think there might be some legitimacy to it, but I can tell you this: they they are definitely some of the biggest dipshits you'll ever encounter and deal with, man. I mean, you know, eh, yeah. Well, I could go on for too long about that case in particular, so I won't. But yeah, there was a lot to that, and a lot to these guys up there, and a lot of crazy cases up there. We had one of our deputies get killed up there, and I was involved in that case, and there were some other, just crazy stuff that happened in the desert. You almost cringed when you were up for murders. The way you get your murder is just wherever the next person died. That's where you were going. It could be in Compton, or it could be in Lancaster, or it could be, in the Marina Del Rey. I mean,
Yeah.
LA County is a big place. Hell, for that matter, it could be in Catalina. Catalina Island is LA County. So they'd put you on a helicopter and fly you out to Catalina Island to handle a murder if it happened out there. But the point is, when you're up for murders, and a Lancaster or Palmdale case came in, you'd always cringe. It's like, oh God, what are we going to be into here?
Yeah. I mean, I lived in Phelan for 2 years because we got a sweet price on a house with 2 acres fenced in. We were up against the mountains, so it was kind of like, if you're going to be in Phelan, you want to be in this area. But when you would drive down and go lower and lower and lower towards the Mojave Desert, you would in broad daylight witness crimes. Like, you would see people parked on a corner, and we saw a guy, climbing out of a house, running into a Honda Civic. Like, there was like a road of delineation in Phelan where it was like, south of here bad, north probably you're going to be fine. They just didn't make it up that far. The criminals, they were down in the lower parts of the high desert. But it is a very kind of a spooky place, the high desert. And I had to go to Palmdale to the courthouse a few times for insurance stuff. And it is, I don't get it. I was born and raised in New England, so obviously it looks really different. But it looks like it's like forced humanity. It's almost like Las Vegas. It's like people are forcing to live in this area is very difficult. There's like no water. It's dry all the time.
Yeah.
Even the nice houses are out in just the desert. It's like, it's just weird to me. It's like it's a totally bizarre place, and the people out there were definitely the only thing I can describe it as, like, if I was at one of the gas stations fueling up, it was like street rats. Like, you'd be getting fuel, and you would have at times people scurrying around the gas station, like just like little street rats, like weird ass, usually tweaked out white dudes. The good thing is the plumage they wear in nature is totally a warning sign, because they look nuts, they look insane, and they were.
Yeah.
So the high desert was like I think there's like, when we were there's so much potential to it, because our property, a lot of the year, we had snow-capped mountains. I could leave our property on an ATV and hit the California state trails and be riding a ridge that overlooks, the Cajun Pass. I mean, it was breathtaking. And I would see all this acreage for sale there, like hundreds and hundreds of acres up against these mountains, just not selling. I'm like, this seems like a place where they would
Right.
put a spa in or, something, but just double wides,
Yeah.
no real interest. I remember I was walking my dog. I used to go on a couple mile walks, and they were putting this new house up, and the house went up, and all I could smell when I walked by it was raw marijuana. I'm like, that's is raw. Like that's a grow house, and it was.
Yeah.
They had a bunch of pit bulls in the yard running around the fence and would try to get out to get after my dog, and sure enough, it got taken down. It was just a grow house of a mile from my house. It was a truly bizarre place. So I've had guys on before that have talked about like pulling bodies out of the canals out there, and another totally creepy thing to me is those canals, those water canals that are just going through the
Yeah.
desert.
The aqueduct.
Yeah, the aqueduct, that's what they call them. Such a bizarre place. And our sheriff's department was great. I talked to I think Phelan has like 15,000 people, and they had like maybe 2 guys on for the area. And because there was tweakers and they would hop your fence and all that. And they basically what I got was like, hey, if we show up, someone's in your fence and they're dead, there's only one story. Because if we show up and this guy's got a story to tell, you're in a lot more trouble. And I never said that. That's basically what the deputy told me.
That's funny.
Yeah, so definitely a really interesting place. Well, Danny, I've had you on here almost an hour. Just a couple more questions. When you think back on your career, can you think of a positive situation that you encountered?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. The there were several. I mean, when I worked patrol, I made some contacts with people that needed help, and I was able to help them. And nothing that I talk much about or anything, because that takes away from why you did it in the first place. But those things were good. You meet good, decent people, and you come to know people in your community that are trapped there. I remember during the riots, and I was heading down there, and my sister calls me, and she's like, "Why do you have to go down there? Just can't they just let, they can burn their whole town down? Who cares?" And I said, well, there's a lot of people down there that don't deserve that, and I mean,
Yeah.
she was just caught up in the moment, and worried about her brother. But, the thing is, we knew, all of us knew, there were a lot of really good people. You just didn't see a lot of them because they lived behind, security bars, and they didn't come out much. But so there were good people. As far as an actual story, I'll tell you, working homicide one night, I get called out to a murder over in Lennox's area, which is kind of over by the airport. But but I'm told that they got the suspect in custody, which is kind of exciting. It's like, oh, cool, a definite solve. We used to call those walkthroughs or slow rollers, because you already got a suspect and stuff. And I
Nice.
get down there, and there's this dead cholo, to help you out with, the use your word for the day,
Thank you.
on this lawn, and it's an elevated lawn, with like a 3-foot retaining wall around it, and it's right on the corner of a very, very busy street. And this dead cholo was over there, kind of, just cooling off, and I'm talking to the deputy. That's the first thing you do. You get there, you get the patrol deputy that's handling the case, and you talk to him and ask him, okay, so what do you got? What happened? Blah, blah, blah. And he's telling me, he says, well, he goes, the guy's in custody because, right after we got here, he drove by, and this lady identified him and said, that's him. So we went and got him, and we did a field show up. This woman identified him and said, yeah, that's definitely him. And I'm like, so he did a drive-by? And he says, yeah. He goes, he drove by and shot out of, the window of his car. Well, there's shell casings on the lawn there, and I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe this guy shot back or whatever. Well, no, he didn't. He didn't shoot back at all. And it turned out it was a walk-up shooting. So I go to the station and interview this guy. I'm like, okay, we got to go talk to this guy right away. Kind of put the crime lab people in motion to start working on the crime scene. But I'm like, I got to go interview this guy. And I go in there, and this guy that I'm looking at, is number one, he's this specimen of health, and not a bad looking guy, uh, and he looks like a professional athlete. And turns out he plays football for a major university. And and you could tell he's scared, man. I mean, the guy is just really scared. So we start talking, and he's not sure he should trust me. And I told him, I said, I said, I said, right now, I'm the only person that's going to help you, because if you're not involved in this thing, you need to talk to me and give me a full accounting of what you were doing and why you were there. Well, it turns out, because I try to not make this a real long story, but him and a buddy of his were going to go to a party in West LA, and his buddy tells him to go up this street, because on the way there he's going to buy some marijuana. And so they drive up this street. There's nowhere to park, and he says, just hang out here, just park here, and I'll run in and grab some marijuana. And so the guy runs in, and our man who was arrested is sitting in his car, and it's a Cadillac Escalade with big 22-inch wheels and shit. It's the kind of car that, it's black, it draws attention, and he's
Yeah.
sitting there double parked, thinking, man, I don't want to get jammed by the cops. And pretty soon some cop, well, no, yeah, cop drives by. So he decides, well, I'll take a trip around the block. So he goes around the block, and he goes right past the corner where this thing happened. And of course, he's got his stereo thumping and all that shit. And he goes back and parks, double parks again. And he's waiting a few minutes. Now more cops are coming, only this time they got lights and sirens on. And he's like, oh shit, man. So he pulls off again, and he goes around the same block. And this time, as he comes around, this Hispanic woman, who's their quote unquote witness, goes, yeah, him, you know.
Oh,
So they
jeez.
jam him, and she says, yeah, he's the one that drove by. So the only thing that we were able to figure out is he must have driven by right when this cholo was getting smoked on the lawn. And because his car just draws so much attention, and he had the tunes cranked and stuff, number one, he wouldn't have even heard the gunshots, but it drew all the attention to him. And of course, he didn't want to tell this story. I mean, he didn't want to admit to, we stopped to buy some marijuana. And I'm like, look, dude, you could have a kilo of cocaine up your ass. I don't care. I'm the murder
Yeah.
police. We are
Right.
here to solve a murder. And if you
Yeah.
didn't do that murder, trust me, you want to talk to me, because if you decide that you'd rather talk to an attorney, you're probably going to be in county jail for, about 6 months while your attorney's, making his boat payments with your money and all that stuff, and stretching this thing out. I mean, I want to resolve this tonight, because I knew he didn't do it. I knew he didn't have anything to do with it. And I
Yeah.
found the fricking the partner. Once he gave me the guy's name and stuff, I found him, and he gave me the exact same story, before they had a chance to talk. And
Wow.
so I get the guy out of jail, and it was a good feeling. I spent about 4 hours just trying to prove that this guy didn't do it. And he had grown up in Compton and never been arrested or anything. And I thought, this is a remarkable guy. He's a guy that grew up in a really tough neighborhood. He's an athlete. He's never
Yeah.
been in trouble with the law. And this stupid thing that happened tonight could really hinder his future. So, he had been booked, but that's it. And truthfully, all we would have to do is just do an 849B1, which is you release him. But that charge showing that he had been arrested for murder would always be there.
Ugh.
And so I took it a step further. I put the case together and took it to the district attorney and said, I want an exoneration on this guy, so that it comes off his record, and he has documentation to show that he was not the person involved in this, because
Nice.
I didn't want his future derailed. So that
No,
was
that's
that was
excellent.
probably one of the, I tell people, I said, yeah, it's, there's lots of unsolved cases. Every cop out, every homicide detective has them, and that's okay. But you don't want to put the wrong guy in prison. I'd rather have 10
Absolutely.
unsolved cases than send one innocent man to prison.
Hell yeah. That's a great story. I love that. That's definitely a positive encounter. Damn,
Oh,
man.
cool.
Yeah, that's great, man. Because, you have to wonder, would everybody go all the way on that, all the way to the exoneration? You know what I mean? Because it does suck if you get charged with something and then you're not guilty. It's still there. Cops run you and they see it and they go, they got to wonder,
Yep.
Did he get off on a
Oh yeah,
technicality? You know?
yeah, and we're like, oh yeah, so they didn't have enough to file on you, but you did a murder. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what everyone's going to think. But worse yet, I mean, I don't know to what extent they do backgrounds on a guy that's maybe going to go into the NFL or something. I mean, this guy looked like he could, and I honestly don't know what his future held, but I know that I did not impede it, and I felt proud about that.
Hell yeah. That's excellent. Danny, so real popular question here is new advice to, or sorry, advice to new police officers or people looking to get into the field. I get a lot of emails about people hear your guys' stories and they actually hear enough of them and they decide to become cops. So I get emails with like academy graduation pictures and stuff like that thanking you guys. So what advice would you give to people thinking about getting into it?
And a lot of people ask that question just in casual conversation. So, a couple things, Steve. One, I would say, number one, if it's in your heart, do it. I realize that all us guys that have been there and done that, we're like, God, I'd never do the job today, not under these circumstances. Well,
Right.
that's true. And when I got hired, there were 20-year salty LAPD vets that would sit in the shortstop and tell me, "Ah, kid, you're just starting out. God, I wouldn't do this job again." And I had the time of my life, man. I mean, everyone
Right.
that hires on, they hire on in a different era with different dynamics, and they adapt and they negotiate their careers, the best that they can. And right now, it's tough to be a cop. There's no doubt about that. And I pray for the guys on the street because and gals, it's a tough time to be a cop. But if it's in your heart to be a cop, pursue it because it is one of the most rewarding things you can do, and it's also one of the most difficult things you can do. I left the job with PTSD, and that's what my memoir is about. That's another thing I'd say. If someone listening to this wants to be a cop, go read my memoir, because it will give you a lot to think about, and maybe it'll be an affirmation for you, and maybe it will tell you that maybe you want to do something different. But I think that anyone that wants to be a cop should read that book. I really do.
Absolutely. And I think it would be great just because it's amazing how many people get into the field and don't, it's hard to quantify to them what trauma is like as a police officer, like how you can tell them all day long, but to them it's still movies and one ride along they did or whatever. But if they have the information, if they know the feelings that come up are okay and normal. You know what I mean? Like if it's okay to be kind of floored after something real traumatic you see and it's normal and they hear it from somebody like you with this long and storied career, like that's going to help people. That's going to help them put it in perspective and not feel like they shouldn't get talk to somebody or they shouldn't be feeling these feelings because they're not tough enough. You know what I mean? I think just reading a memoir like that could really help.
Well, and that's a big part of the why I wrote that memoir, and I get emails and messages from people all around the country, cops that say, man, I'm so glad you wrote this because most cops, I think we're getting better, with being able to talk more, but certainly my generation, we didn't hurt. You didn't hurt. You didn't cry. You didn't have, you know, uh, nightmares or issues or anything else. I mean, that was just there's just no way. And the truth is, we all hurt and we all cry and we all feel broken at times to varying degrees. And the most important thing is that we have to get where we can address it because quite frankly, I've got several friends who've committed suicide. I have others who drank themselves to death, and technically it should be considered suicide as well. But I honestly believe that a lot of these things are because they don't talk about it. The, real quick, I'll just tell you this: the way I started writing was they sent me to a shrink when they diagnosed me with PTSD, and the shrink is the one that said I should write because he had a sample of my when they asked me to write, hey, tell us about your job and what's stressful, and he's reading it, he's like, hey man, you write really well, you should write for a living. Well, I didn't. I'm like, whatever, doc. I blew him off, but here's the thing: at the end, he goes, no, he goes, Danny, seriously, he goes, it's the most therapeutic thing you can do.
Yeah.
And so that's how I started writing. And I did find that it was therapeutic, but it still took me 15 years before I could start writing the nonfiction, the memoir, because it was just too, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't address it. I couldn't be truthful about the things that I wrote in there. And then when I did finally write it, it brought back a lot of things that, weren't so great to have revisit. But, it is what it is, man. And it's a tough job, but like I said, it's also one of the most rewarding things you can do. And and you certainly don't have to wonder, if you lived a full life. Cops don't have that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank God for your therapist, man. That's amazing. And like you're saying, those guys the guys that tell you to stuff it. Well, there's a good reason for why cops retire and they drop dead 5 years later, because those are the stuffers.
Yeah.
I mean, cops drop dead, and those are a lot of those guys. Not all of them, but a lot of them are those guys. They don't. They
Right.
they never talk about it, and then you can't even enjoy your retirement because cops are dying 5 years after they retire, which is ridiculous. It should not be happening. If you
Yeah.
have some systems, some tools, know when it's time to leave. You know what I mean? Know when you've done your service and time to get out. That's great, man. So tell us more about the Dickey Floyd novels.
Oh, you got my website there. Okay.
Right here.
Yeah, the website, it's a blog and, kind of a book promotion website. It's called the Murder Memo. And you can get there by themurdermemo.com or dickeyfloydnovels.com. But this page you're looking at, it's called the book table. So if you scroll down, you'll see these are my novels, starting with A Good Bunch of Men, and it's a series. So books 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then I have one book. If you scroll down a little bit more, The Outlaw is a spin-off of those books, with some of the same characters. But that's why it looks different on the cover. It's a spin-off. The First Felony is the last one I just published here in February. And then I think if you scroll down further, I think no, go to the homepage. No, the homepage doesn't have it either. Wait a minute. I'm gonna have to work on that.
Try
Why
books.
is my why is my memoir not there? Yeah, um, hmm.
I'm
Well,
looking.
scroll down again. Okay, well, if nothing else, you can see on the right over here, there's a picture. Go back up a little bit more right there. So the Nothing Left to Prove is right there on the right. That's the audio book cover. So it's on audio also. But
Okay.
um, yeah,
Great
so
covers too. I mean, these are fantastic.
yeah, I love my cover artist. He does a fabulous job, and I'm real happy with it.
Best place to go to buy them would be your website, which I'll put a link in the show notes. Better than Amazon and all that.
Well, the truth is Amazon is probably the easiest, best place to buy them. And of course, most people actually read on Kindle. So, and all my books are in Kindle Unlimited. So for you avid readers out there, you can read every one of my books for free if you belong to Kindle Unlimited. But if you want a signed copy of a paperback, then you go through my website. But I got to charge you a little bit more than Amazon does. If you got Amazon Prime, you get free delivery. But it's hard for me to not charge more than they do, or I don't make any money.
Right. Yeah. That's always a way. Well, fantastic, man. I will put a link in the show notes to whichever you prefer, Amazon or your website. Or actually, I just put both. I can put signed copy and then put your website below it. That's no problem at all. It was a absolute honor to have you on the show. Fantastic
Yeah.
stories. I really appreciate it.
Hey, my honor to be here.
All right, brother. I'm going to do the
Well, thank you, Steve.
outro.
I really appreciate being on.
Oh, man, my pleasure. I'm going to do the outro to the show. Just thank the Patreon sponsors. Can you hang on for like 2 minutes?
Yeah.
All right, I'll be right back with you, sir. The great Danny Smith, guys, fantastic stories. I know he's got a bunch more in him. Maybe we can talk him into coming back someday in the future. Ton of books, great ratings on them. They look fantastic. Go check him out. The link is in the show notes. If you really love the show and you want to show your support, the link to the Patreon is also in the show notes. Go and do that. There's 2 levels, patrolman and sergeant. Maybe I'll add a third at some point. Also on Patreon, you get the, I'll send you a vinyl 3x3 sticker from the podcast, suitable for putting on your vehicle or a water bottle or whatever people do with them. And if you do the sergeant's level, I will give you a shout on the show, and you also will get access to all the live recordings and Cops in the News episodes that we do. This is the point in the show where I thank the Patreon sergeants. Who I'm talking about is the great and powerful Andy Biggs, Greg Gadboy, everybody, Adam Mihal, the great Chris June, Gary Steiner, Jake Pinino, the great John Shoemaker, Lauren Stimson, everybody, the handsome Lane Campbell, Seth Wright, the great James Rose, Tony Fahey, everybody, the great Ben Peters, Jason Lau, everyone, the great Sasha McNabb, Scott Minkler, the great Tammy Walsh, holding it down at dispatch, William James Long, that's Deputy William James Long to you, thank you very much, Sean Clifford, Dennis Carrasquillo, Iceman from the Motor Cop Chronicles, check him out, George Tessier, I'll see you at church, brother, Scott Young, the great Thomas Connell, Dan Carlson from Burley Boards, make amazing woodwork, check him out on Instagram, Doug and Kelly Newman, love you guys, see you at church, the great Dave Ellman, Elliot Sykes, Richard Tolles, keep on trucking, brother, Christian, thank you very much, sir, the great Brad Thompson, Kyle Roberts, the great Zach Haney, Nancy Hammond, everybody, Clark Luckoff, Adam McMahon, Ossifer, Andy, everybody, the great Bentley Barnett, Sheriff Ronald Long, everyone, the great Zachary Pleat, Jason LaFree, everybody, Jason, I'm sorry, J.A. Family and Company, thank you very much, and the great and wonderful Jessica King. Those are the Patreon sergeants. I thank you so much for that. Thank you for your continued support. You keep the boat afloat and you keep the podcast going. So I love you, and I'll see you next time.